Hello?
One second.
Start பண்ணலாம் sir.
Just wait. I'm sharing screen with you. Yeah, very happy to interact with you today. I just want to continue from where I left in the past. In the last class, I mentioned how we should use the word, the difference between war of independence and struggle for independence. Perhaps you may recollect some of the points I made in the last class. I made exactly the difference between the former and the latter in the context of American War of Independence and India's struggle for independence. So in the former case, it was swift and quick armed struggle, and that was in fact terrain is different. But in the latter, we find the struggle is continuous, prolonged, and it very much part of our tradition. Therefore, this part is very important. How to view this struggle? I have taken up the topic which is very vast, but we know from our childhood onwards, we read the causes of 1857 revolt. The events that go into the making of history are many. And you know, scholars from different walks of life, people from different walks of life, and you know, even politicians think about the struggle, and that struggle is defined by them in different ways. And that's the crux of the matter. And because the sacrifices that was seen in bloodshed, that was in fact different from what followed later, are very important. And we cannot forget this, because we have on the agenda the very important struggle, the battle, that of course to end in disaster, but still we have to in fact think back and reflect upon what went on, how in fact it has shaped the coming years for our freedom lovers. So now the very important thing is each generation interrogates history in its own way. I just present some of the PPT with you so that you can follow, and if you want to intervene in the middle, you can interact, and I am ready to interact with you. Each generation interrogates history in its own way. And you know, everyone makes history, and when he makes history, he doesn't know that he makes history, but he makes history in a given situation. Therefore, each individual is very important. Each individual, in fact, thinks about his history, his past history, and his coming future history also. Therefore, each generation interrogates history in its own way. And today, history is seen in a different light. Earlier, the 1857 is seen as the act of sepoys. Later, it is seen as the act of the peasants. Later, it is seen as part of disgruntled elements, like Tandya Chobe, Nana Patnavis, or we have Rani of Jhansi, are in fact the people who lost their power. But today, when you in fact introspect history, or in fact study the particular period, you bring it to focus some of the issues which are very much a part of that. And today, in that particular framework, gender aspect of the events of 1857 are seen. And you know what is gender? In fact, it is a neutral word. It is not women and men as differentiated human bodies, but as men have rights, so women too have rights. And so gender as a concept today becomes a defining aspect of historical writing. In particular, in 1857, even though we read masculine aspect of the army, in particular, if it is a Lawrence army, it is a Neil's army, or it is Campbell's army, or it is Campbell army, or whoever you think about as a man, that you think him as masculine. But we have only exception to that, Rani of Jhansi as a female. Therefore, but that's wrong to see history in that particular masculine aspect. We have to see history of 1857 from gender aspect, and that is a broader aspect of it. So we now have a memory which is in fact culled out from the past. And we in fact take from the people who continue to have memories about the past. We interview the people in the particular area and we record them, and we in fact construct history, even though some of which may not be acceptable, mythological, but still there is a certain element of history that goes into the making of the particular period. So we have Uda Devi as a Parsi woman who was a close associate of Begum Hazrat Mahal. She was in the house. A very important woman who played a major role in 1857. We have also semi-mythical figure of Jalkari Bai, very important woman, Dalit servant, who was in fact assistant to Lakshmi Bai, Rani of Jhansi. Perhaps we may ask, how is it possible that you can use the word Dalit as a servant? A Dalit, how Dalit can be the word used? It can be only used because it is only in the after independence. We have Ambedkar who wanted to use it in a broader context, and today it has become much more different. But that is different. Dalit in Hindi, it means oppressed. Anybody who's oppressed, anybody who's lower in social scale, anybody who economically, socially is downtrodden is a Dalit. Therefore, Dalit not necessarily a part of settled castes or settled tribes. It can be anybody who is oppressed. So in this context, we have here an interesting figure like Jalkari Bai, who was an assistant to Rani of Jhansi. And from them, we understand there are many people who construct history about women. So if we don't have Dalit as a god who was very important person to inform Mangal Pandey about the cartridges which are smeared with the fat of the cow and the pig, definitely Mangal Pandey would have been ignorant about that. And it is the Dalit god who gave information about that. And that is the information today that became a very explosive matter. And it is very difficult to separate that particular, the god was a Dalit and Mangal Pandey, and he becomes aware of later, how come that I was so long ignorant about this particular period? How long it is that the whole country is contaminated, polluted? How is that, in fact, you and I together stay and work in a particular company? How was it possible? So this is a question Mangal Pandey later poses, not only about himself, but also about East India Company. That way, it becomes a very important. So a Dalit knowledge about a particular period, particular aspect is today culled out from records. And we construct history in such a beautiful way, and we have wonderful history, historical narratives that today become part and parcel of history curricula. Right. Another important thing is we have very interesting works, and interesting works like William Dalrymple was written a very lost Mughal, Bahadur Shah II. And it is a ceremonial king, but unfortunately, at the age of 82, he was catapulted to power. Later, he had to suffer. And that particular work has given a new insight into how, in fact, religion becomes very important. How Delhi becomes a chaotic place in the last years of last Mughal period. How East India Company, how the war, in fact, waged in the streets. How religion binds the people. How, in fact, the poor were very much affected. So there's very interesting narratives that we find in William Dalrymple work. We have an interesting book by President Raj, by Eric Stokes. He is one of the foremost historians of 1857, who was in fact a deconstructed history of 1857, because 1857 is not to be seen as the Chippai Mutiny alone. It has to be seen as many movements. It is 1857, maybe the 1 year, but we have in fact different places. We have different people. We have different leaders. We have different interests. We have different communities. We have different ecologies. So all these in fact are different and they are separate, but in one way or another they are linked. And how we have to view 1857 is to be, first of all, to understand 1857 is not in fact is the monolithic year. 1857 revolt is not a monolithic event. 1857 is not in fact one particular significant disturbing event for either Indians or for the East India Company, later the British, but it is the many. And in fact, it is the many movements in different places with different interests and different backgrounds and different ecologies. So we have the President Raj is set a great benchmark for writing of history in the latter period. So when you read these books, when you have in fact a number of books again in the pipeline, you see 20 years ago, the number of books published was 1,172 printed books in European languages. Perhaps it includes European languages means English, Spanish, French, German, or many more languages, Russian, so on. We have a specific articles on the 1857 and 369 articles from journals and periodicals, and 100 works of fiction. In fact, literature is proliferating here on the 1857, in particular about love, about caste, about peasant, about suffering, about in fact race, about in fact conflicts, how people are separated from families, how in fact the pain is projected. So 1857 today becomes a very, very important theme for historians, for economists, or for in fact sociologists, for literature. So we have, in fact, a great platform open to everybody to play upon. So that way, so the particular period becomes a central and central period, and this is why we have to in fact understand 1857 is not to be seen as the period of the revolt only by the sepoys. And we have, of course, the many more scholars who wanted to discuss it, but unfortunately, earlier writings become still defining moments for many people, because we know 1857 is seen as War of Independence. British are the first who called it, undermining it as a sepoys, mutiny, but later Indian V.D. Savarkar has called it a War of Independence, and later only we find the first War of Independence. So when he published the book in 1909, he called it a War of Independence. But later when it became banned by government of India, the British government, he in fact became a very important person as far as the particular period is concerned for 1857, and his work is become in secret bounds, made available to everybody. There it became the first War of Independence. So that is the phase. And in 1857, the Parliament in fact accepted 1857 as the first War of Independence. But there is a debate whether we can call this one as a first War of Independence. That is the significant one, because whether we can call it as a War of Independence or whether we should call it in a different way. So this is a significant feature of this. Perhaps we have to say, if you call it independence, the atrocities that are committed by the Indians, or atrocities in retaliation committed by the East India Company forces on Indians, cannot, because it cannot be considered. It is in fact lowering the great sacrifices made by the people. And you cannot in fact compare the post-1857 leaders with the 1857 leaders. But independence doesn't require a bloodshed. Independence doesn't require the narrative of rape. Independence doesn't require a narrative of, in fact, crimes, violence. This is extreme on both sides. Extremes on both sides, because this we should forget. Not because that we should not remember it, but because if we remember, this will really accentuate the animosities in modern times. Therefore, the atrocities that are committed on both sides of the fence are to be forgotten. And the word independence cannot be given to the people who are, in fact, a party to the particular phase. Whether you do it out of hunger or in retaliation, whatever it may be, but there is no justification for that. And that particular one, of course, has ended, and it has not set, in fact, anyway, a model for later leaders. It has not become part of the Indian national movement after 1885. Definitely, we may remember it because it is part of our Indian history, but that doesn't mean that we can celebrate it. Therefore, the scholars, in fact, have different kinds of opinion about to call it as the first War of Independence or it is the last War of Independence. But definitely, we have to accept that the people who suffered should be rescued from the condescension in which they are seen today, and we have to give them honor. And we may find the fault with them, but we cannot, in fact, reject them, and we have to, in fact, rehabilitate them in the historical narratives so that at least they can find a place in the pantheon of Indian freedom fighters. Of course, in the lower level, but not at the highest level. So with these words, just I want to go into the causes of what are the main. Perhaps from school days onwards, you read what are the causes. Perhaps you list them. When you go to the Google, also you can find good details about it. or if you find a very good books, you can read them. As I given you the list of books that they throw new perspectives about the causes of the age disorder. Of course, I can put it in a very nutshell of what the causes are in 3-4 subheadings. One is the political causes. Perhaps that you know, obliteration of many of the old political landmarks. This is the territorial landmarks, very important territorial landmarks. You know, some of the territories which are under the control of the princes, which are once upon a time gave honor. In fact, the name of it, in fact, created fear in the minds of the people, or in fact obliterated. This is, in fact, the historical cycle which happens. But in the British period, you find they don't have any scruples to, in fact, erase the territorial limits. So most of the territories were, in fact, reshuffled, and in fact, obliterated. So we have the political landmarks. In fact, you cannot say this is the territory which belongs to me, which is territory that belongs to you. And it is by conquest, it is not possible. It is only the Britain who can have the full control over the territory. So that way, we have old landmarks, Nagpur, Satra, Jhansi, Punjab, Sindh. These are all once upon a time very, very flourishing areas, were very much very politically very powerful territories, but they are nowhere there in the picture. So that is one point. And you have distant states. In fact, they are not happy that some states remain. In particular, Sir Charles Napier was very particular that had he been in power, if he could continue to be in power for some more time, he could in fact remove even whatever existed as Hyderabad. So he was in fact thinking that no princely state should exist, even under the control of the East India Company. That is, even subsidiary alliance itself should not be there. So subsidiary alliances should be used only to make a control of this. But even that is not necessary. You should in fact obliterate even that. So you must bring even the existing ones, whether they are without subsidiary alliance or with subsidiary alliance, under the control of it. So Charles Napier was so imperialistic, and he was reckless in his pursuit of conquest of the territories. The treatment meted out to Nana Sahib by Dalhousie. Nana Sahib was adopted son of Bajirao II, and Bajirao II was given a pension, and he was a pensioner of the East India Company, such a powerful man, but he fell into the hands of the East India Company, and he remained, so long as he remained, they gave him pension. Later, Dalhousie came that, no, this cannot be extended to you because it is only for the person who signed it. So he was not a son, he was only adopted son. So under Dr. Plabs, it is not only territories which are in fact extinguished, but even the pension that was given to the person also in fact extinguished. So doubly it was used. So they can interpret it in any way they want to interpret it. So this is in fact a typical way of doing it, because they are the one they decided. They are the masters, so they can do whatever they want to do. So treatment of Nana Sahib is very important. So as a political man, that he lost his significance. He is a beggar, to be short, that we have to say. The company's annexation restricted the opportunities that had been available to indigenous talent. See, in the princely states or small states where in fact the talent was accepted, that is artisans, musicians, or in fact literators or educators or whoever, whatever kind of job in fact they wanted to do, they can do it, they are promoted, they're patronized. But now, once they came under the control of the East India Company, they lost everything. They are thrown out. It is almost like taking over the companies, merging them, and you retain some people who are talented, so you throw out the rest. So that way you copy. So it is some kind of amalgamation of the companies, reorganization of the companies. They think East India Company is doing a business there. So they're not thinking about, in fact, the people. They're thinking about sentiment. They're not thinking about the territories. They're thinking about in terms of how you can maximize your profits. being a company, the business company, the commercial company, being a company which has no roots in India, it did not have any kind of scruples, and it wanted to play one group against another. At the same time, it wanted to in fact obliterate everything. So this is the extreme way in fact they did it. So you find this kind of things continuous. This is in fact happening right from 1757 onwards. So they did not have anything because their interest is only money, money, money. When they think about job, they think about only profit. When they think about profit, they think about how in fact they maximize it. And the maximization of the profit at any level, at any cost, is the priority, and they do not compromise on it. And in fact, they will always justify it in terms of the sovereignty. And if you defy it, it is in fact against the sovereignty. So they interpreted it, they wrote it, they made it compulsory, and they broke it, and they did it for themselves, not for anybody else. So everything is a matter of convenience for them. So that way, the indigenous talent, which was already there, accommodated there, which was very much in fact flourishing there, somehow survived there, even if it is on sustenance, today did not find anything for them to enjoy. So they were disaffected. Politically, they became more and more disgruntled elements. They have to join later and became very important force as advisors, counselors, leaders that perhaps we can see in the last. The land settlements in annexed territories affected vested interest. You know, land settlements, right from the beginning of the Cornwallis, we find the permanent settlement. In Madras, we have Monroe settlements, later Reed settlements. So whether it is a permanent settlement of Bengal, or it is a rightwise settlement of Madras Presidency or Bombay Presidency, or whichever settlements that you have, all the settlements in fact oriented towards generating a revenue. And land was a very important source of revenue for the British. And so they actioned the land, they got the revenue, and later on they found that it was not profitable. Later again they will go for 5 years of tenure or 10 years of tenure, and then either go for actioning at highest level, again they go for revenue. So this way they keep rotating it, but in course of time what happened, the people who are taking the land for cultivation were unable to in fact pay the revenue, or in fact find a return. And that way, many of them lost their interest in land, and many of them they sold the lands at the loss, and then they became purpose, sitting. So the peasants who had land lost their land, they became landless laborers. So already the land was scarce. Now the landless people joined again the land because there is no other alternative for them to go and work. Either there was no commerce because which was under the control of the East India Company. Trade, again, it was a monopoly of the East India Company. Industry, which was very much nascent, it was not there. Or you have in fact weaving industry or any other silk industry, which was in fact ruined because of the industrialization which set in at this time in Britain. So this way, wherever you find some kind of way out, most of the people in India suffered because of the policies which are pursued by the East India Company. So land settlements in various parts of India disturbed the people who were there as settlers. Later, they had to become paupers. And this is in fact one reason why in 1857, the people thought how we should evaluate their own role in relation to the East India Company. What is the reason? The company had the arrogant behavior because being a whites, being from outsider, they did not understand what Indian mind is, what Indian value is, what Indian religion is, what Indian culture is. And this is one reason why in fact they were not accommodated. Till 1857, there was no scope for them to do anything. And legislature was not there to discuss their problems. Associations were not there because most of them are just now receiving English education and getting some kind of idea. And of course, they could think only about their survival, not about the people. So we have Syed Ahmad Khan, who was in fact saying the Indians were not in any way associated with the East India Company or co-opted into the English system of administration. That way, the English did not receive any counter counsel or did not know what is the mind of the people. So he wrote the book Causes of the Revolt of 1857, and he gave the reason why, in fact, the British lost. At the same time, Indians were discriminated, and the reason is there was a gap between the Indian way of thinking and British way of ruling. And Indian way of thinking is basically not seen with recognition and acknowledged. And this is the reason why, in fact, it happened because it's vengeance. So that was the perspective that we have. We have, in fact, the religious causes, very, very important. India is, a old country, traditional country, rich country, resourceful country. And it is not like America. It is not like Britain. It is much older than, in fact, any of the countries in Europe. It is as old as Chinese and Asian country like Egypt. So we have, in fact, a great tradition, which in fact harks back to more than 5,000 years or 6,000 years. So we have to accept it. The modernity may not be there with us, but there is, in fact, a tradition which, in fact, can accommodate modernity. See, but they may have modernity, but they may not have tradition. So there is a conflict between these two, but perhaps this is not time to discuss these. But what I want to say here, you have religious causes, which religious causes is very important. Of course, some of the changes that, in fact, the East India Company brought about are very, very important for us. And we cannot find fault with them. The earlier stages of the East India Company, they, in fact, thought about some of the things which are evil. And they thought that it is obnoxious. They have to, in fact, remove some of these. And they wanted, in fact, to see the changes come. After all, anybody who is sensitive can really feel offended at the sight of the women who are treated here, at the sight of, in fact, the burning of women alive, or of the killing of a child, female child, or, in fact, the degradation of the communities in the social hierarchy, or justification of the hierarchy, which, in fact, keeps Brahmins at the top and the Adi Dravidas or lower caste at the bottom. And you give a mythological justification for various kinds of discriminations. So this is, in fact, is unacceptable. Perhaps it may not have existed, it may have existed, it may not be justifiable in the past. But the same thing cannot be continued, allowed to be continued. We have to put an end to this. Education has given us to think, education has given us to reflect upon what is right, what is not right. So what is wrong, what is significant. So the Indian system in the beginning of the 19th century definitely had certain kind of wrongs. Those wrongs are to be set right, if it is possible by legislation. And if legislation, again with deterrence. So mere pious words will not survive. They will not solve the problems. No preaching, but preaching, accept a legislation with also deterrent punishment. So these three should go together. This way, we find the earlier liberals, they all thought about India. They thought they are the white man burden. They thought white man burden. Sorry. They are a white man burden. The white man burden is that they come here as a civilizing mission. They want to proselytize Indians, convert them into Christianity, change them to Western way of life, and somehow they do it. But having failed in this task, of course that part is later period we can see, having failed in the task, they thought, in fact, they can at least bring some kind of changes, at least to start with the women. So they found obnoxious practice of sati, a burning of a widow along with the funeral fire of her husband. So they want to put a stop to it. And that great philosopher, the Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian theory became a very significant philosophy, which became enacted in the latter period under Benting, and you have abolition of the sati, and we have put an end to the practice of female infanticide. And these two are very, very important. Of course, these two are very much confined only to the Bengal region. And the headquarters of the East India Company, Bengal, they wanted to do it, and that is the duty to them to do it. But this was not a practice throughout India. And the practice there only among the higher caste people. And so, among the Kulin Brahmins, this practice was there. So, we have in fact a very important person like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and others who carried forward this particular agitation against the sati practice, infanticide, or education of women, education of whole society, so on and so forth. So this is very, very important. And we have in fact, along with this, teaching of European science and medicine. So this is again is very important. And it is not that it is their own agenda, it is the Indians themselves wanted that they should go for a change, because Sanskrit cannot solve the problems, Persian cannot solve the problems. So at least in place of Sanskrit, in place of Persian, they must go for English, because English has got at the time very important literature in various development, that is, it recorded various developments. Maybe Sanskrit, a very, very important language for the some kind of East India Company servants, like we have very important Asiatic Society members. But teaching of English, along with teaching of English, the teaching of modern science and medicine will go a long way to modernize India, because it is only education can modernize. So there is a difference, of course. We can see whether we should modernize India through English language, whether we should modernize India through knowledge. So the problem is that they thought it is only through English language they can modernize. So that is a wrong concept. We can modernize India through knowledge. That knowledge can be in any language. It can be in Sanskrit, it can be in Persian, it can be in Tamil, it can be in Hindi, it can be in maybe these languages at the point of time were not developed, but they could have given importance to this. But unfortunately, whatever the amount they allotted, they want to see that English is used, English promoted, because the motive is not that they wanted to develop India or modernize India. They wanted to see a crop of civil servants to be created through the English medium, so that they can be the important source of employment for the East India Company. That is, they'll be in the service of the East India Company. That way, they thought, they planned it. Of course, they succeeded in it. So teaching of European science and medicine was not wrong, but teaching of European science and medicine at the cost of Sanskrit, at the cost of Persian, at the cost of Hindi, or at the cost of any other regional languages of the time was definitely injurious, and it does not bring education to the lower sections of society. And education definitely has not reached any level, and the filtration theory was not successful, and it failed. And this is one reason why, in fact, this those who had education Persian, those who had education Sanskrit also became important force, and they agitated against East India Company because they remained unemployed. They were not able to do it. So that was that. But only those who got English education supported the East India Company or supported the 1857. We have exceptions like those who got support of English education got benefit, like Ramachandra. Sri Ramachandra is a very famous mathematician who in fact gave support to the person. Same is the case with Jambu, very important mathematician from Maharashtra, who also supported. So we have exceptional figures who got English education at the same time supported the East India Company and supported